Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere hot. No, not your childhood bedroom with the broken ceiling fan. We're going deep into the golden sands and sun-cracked earth of ancient Persia, where the heat bakes the soil until it crumbles like pastry. You squint up at a sky so blue, it looks painted on. There's no breeze, no clouds, just heat. Heavy, humming, bone-deep heat. But here's the strange part, somewhere out there, in this oven of a landscape, someone is storing ice, real ice, in July. You shuffle forward across sun-scorched stone streets. The soles of your sandals are practically melting. Sweat traces lazy rivers down your back. A baker nods to you as he slides a tray of flatbread into a clay oven. No fire needed, just the midday sun. Nearby, a child tries to fry an egg on a polished stone and almost succeeds. And yet, somewhere beyond the city, past a row of cypress trees and walls the colour of sun-dried apricots, there's a dome. Not a palace, not a temple, something stranger. A hump of mud brick, half sunken into the ground, wide at the base and tapering to a soft peak, like a scoop of ice cream, oddly enough. And it hums with cool silence. Inside, ice, chilled water, cool air. And no, this isn't some kind of magic spell or time traveller's mini-fridge. It's a yakhchal, literally, ice pit, and it's here to help a civilization beat the desert at its own game. Now, you probably wouldn't survive long in this world if you showed up with your modern comfort standards. No air conditioning, no iced coffee, no complaining, and don't even think about plugging in a fan. Your only option for a cool breeze is hoping the wind gods are in a good mood. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and if you're still awake, let me know your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when people are listening. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've just stepped into the Persian Empire about 2,500 years ago. You smell saffron and dust, you hear distant bells on camels clinking softly, and most of all, you feel the sun, merciless and ever-present. And here's the dilemma. The king wants something cold, not just cool. Cold. He's heard tales from the mountains of snow that lingers on high peaks even in summer, of spring houses filled with ice, of water so cold it numbs your fingers. You, as a humble engineer, or builder, or maybe just an unlucky servant, have been volunteered to figure this out. Your mission? Bring snow to the royal court in July. Your first thought is probably what anyone would think. This guy, Senkin, got to be joking. But he's not. In fact, he's already drawn up a little sketch. Not that it helps, it's just a vague doodle that looks like a sad onion, but the king is serious and so are his appetites. Persians at this time aren't just powerful, they're precise. They manage water with canals and qanats, those genius underground tunnels that funnel fresh spring water for miles across burning plains. They chart stars, predict eclipses, build cities in impossible places. So you figure maybe cold in summer isn't completely out of reach. You ask around. Older builders say they've heard whispers of snow being stored underground. Others scoff and suggest you focus on making a better sun hat. But a few start to think. They talk about night breezes, about shade, about thick walls. One guy brings up the idea of heat rising, and you realise you might be able to trick nature into helping you. Still, one thing is clear. You're going to need ice, and a lot of it. And that means heading somewhere the king never goes, the freezing wind-whipped mountains far to the north. That's where the next part of your adventure begins. You look back one more time at the king's court, the garden with its shaded pools and tame peacocks, the musicians playing soft flutes under pomegranate trees. Then you adjust your sandals, sling a rough wool cloak over your shoulder, and start walking toward the cold, toward a miracle. You've barely made it a league outside the city before the sweat starts to soak through your robe. The road is dusty, winding, and full of the kinds of problems that ancient Persia is famous for. Loose stones, nosy goats, and merchants who never stop shouting about their miraculous dates. But your thoughts are far away now, high in the distant mountains. Word has it that snow clings to the Zagros peaks, well into summer, hiding in shady crevices like some precious, shrinking treasure. And if the king wants his chilled pomegranate juice, that's where you'll have to go. At the local caravanserai, a kind of roadside inn for the weary and mildly delusional, you find others already making the same journey. Not for royal demands though, these are snow harvesters, hardy workers who've turned the impossible into an annual tradition. They collect snow in the dead of night when it's coldest and haul it back in straw-packed bundles before the sun has a chance to meddle. You sit beside one of them, an old man with sunburned cheeks and a laugh like creaking wood. We call it Barf Bardari, he tells you, which literally means snow-bearing. It's both a job and a local legend. He's done it for 30 years, lost a toe once, but he laughs that off. Still got 9 others, he says, wiggling his sandal. You ask him why they do it. His answer is wonderfully Persian. Because someone always wants ice in their sherbet. So, you join them. Not that you have much choice. The royal order still burns in your mind. The climb begins before dawn. You wrap yourself in a wool shawl, not for the cold, it's still warm down here, but for the bitter air waiting above. The air grows thinner, and pine trees replace palms. The sky sharpens from soft gold to bright white. By mid-morning, your legs ache, your lungs protest, and your water skin is nearly empty. But ahead, you see it, a snowbank, real, crunching, dazzling snow. It sits in the shadow of a crag, protected from the worst of the sun, sparkling like powdered stars. And that's when it hits you, how utterly strange this is. Snow in Persia, not in a story, but under your feet. You scoop some in your hand and hold it to your face. It stings, gloriously. A boy next to you laughs, tossing a handful at a friend. You're not alone in marvelling. Snow was always magical in hot regions. Even back then, it carried a sense of mystery. How does it last? Why does it fall? Historians still argue whether Persians had specific rituals for snow collection, or whether it was mostly trial, error, and grit. What's certain is that it wasn't a job for the faint-hearted. The next step is packing, and here's where it gets quirky. You wrap the snow in layers of straw, wool, and, if you're lucky, cheap silk from a trade route surplus. The snow bundles are shaped like big, sloppy burritos and loaded onto camels, who look less than thrilled about the arrangement. Don't let them sit down, the old man warns, or they'll warm the whole load. Camels groan, men curse gently, and the caravan slowly begins its descent. You're part of it now, sweating despite the altitude. One man near you has painted his snow bundle with a dye made of crushed saffron petals. So I know which is mine, he grins, but you also suspect he just wants the king to be impressed by yellow-tinged ice. You realise this isn't just about temperature, it's about prestige, power. Persians didn't merely want cold, they wanted controlled cold, snow that arrived not just intact, but elegantly, like a gift, not an accident. And yet, the journey is perilous. One slope too steep, one camel too fussy, and a whole pack could melt into a soggy, expensive mess. The sun starts climbing, and you feel its heat clawing back into your bones. There's a frantic, silent race happening now. The snow must reach the lowlands before the air remembers it's summer again. A boy at the rear starts singing a lullaby to his camel. Someone else offers prayers to Anahita, the goddess of water. You, meanwhile, try not to trip. By nightfall, the first bundles arrive at the outer city, still mostly frozen. You cheer quietly, though no one has the energy to clap. The king won't see this part, he'll never smell the animals or taste the dust. But he'll sip something cold tomorrow. He'll nod faintly, maybe even say, acceptable, and that will be enough. You emerge from the yakhchal just before noon, blinking as the sun hammers down from directly overhead. The silence inside the dome falls away like a blanket, replaced by the chatter of birds, the distant bleating of goats, and the unmistakable groan of heat pressing down on every surface. But today, you're not here to marvel. You're here to understand the machine behind the miracle. Because the yakhchal isn't just a clever building. It's part of a greater cooling system, an invisible, elegant web that ties together water, air, and temperature like the threads of an ancient spell. And that spell starts with physics. Now, you may not be a scientist, but you're pretty sure water evaporating makes things cooler. That's true today, and it was true then. What makes the Persians brilliant is that they figured out how to weaponize that knowledge in the nicest possible way. Your guide for the day is a short, wiry man named Borzuya, who claims to be part engineer, part philosopher, and full-time nosy neighbour. You want to know how it works? He says, gesturing toward a nearby wind tower. Then follow the wind. You do, trailing him to the base of a badgir, a tall, narrow structure that looks like a minaret without the religious purpose. It's a wind catcher, and it's about to show you why Persians weren't just surviving the desert, they were outsmarting it. The badgir is hollow, divided into vertical shafts. When the wind blows, especially the cool night winds, it enters the tower, gets funneled downward, and flows into the connected yakhchal or home. As it passes over the qanat-fed pools or through moistened screens, the air cools even more before circulating gently through the space. No fans, no buttons, just the soft physics of motion and evaporation. You walk into a nearby home outfitted with one. The air inside feels like a whisper compared to the outside roar. Clay floors cool your feet. A jug of water sits on a ledge, still cold from the circulating air. You half expect someone to bring you a lemon wedge and a foot rub, Borzuya beams. See, we don't need magic. Just wind, water, and the will not to cook ourselves alive. In a back courtyard, women hang soaked linens over doorways to encourage further evaporation. This isn't just a trick for yakhchals, it's part of daily life. Every home, it seems, has some version of passive cooling built into its walls, windows, and water systems. The qanats are especially brilliant. They're underground aqueducts that carry cold spring water across vast distances, miles, sometimes, from the mountains to the heart of cities. Because they're buried deep, the water stays cool, and so does the earth around them. These channels are the hidden arteries of Persia, feeding everything from public baths to garden fountains to, you guessed it, the yakhchals. Some historians believe the idea for the yakhchal itself may have evolved from watching qanats naturally cool their surroundings. Others argue it was the other way around, that once the cooling domes existed, the qanats were redirected to serve them. The truth? Well, historians still argue whether this was a chicken or egg scenario. But either way, you're standing in the middle of something sophisticated, long before anyone in Rome figured out indoor plumbing. Back at the dome, Borzuya walks you through the math. It's all surface area and thermal mass, he says, as if that clears everything up. Then he holds up a clay tablet showing temperature readings across the seasons. The dome keeps the inside below freezing for weeks, months, if you do it right. And if you don't, you end up with a very expensive mud pie. There's something poetic about it though. In a world without electricity or thermostats, people still demanded control over their climate. And rather than conquering nature with force, the Persians collaborated with it. They listened to the wind, they studied shadows, they shaped their structures to cradle the cold instead of just fight the heat. You lean against the dome wall again, appreciating its patient, unmoving logic. You wonder how many arguments were had over how tall it should be, how wide, how deep, how many generations it took before someone said, let's add a wind tower, or let's put it next to the qanat. Trial and error, no doubt, and probably some very warm failures along the way. Still, here it stands. And every night, the desert tries to reclaim the cold. And every night, the yakhchal politely declines. Back at the edge of town, the yakhchal looms like a sleeping animal, calm, curved, and patiently doing what no one believes a structure made of mud brick should be able to do. Keep winter trapped in its belly, long after the date palms have ripened. You duck inside once more. The air welcomes you with that impossible coolness. No breeze, no magic, just clever design. It smells faintly of damp earth and straw, with a distant crispness, like the scent of snow that's forgotten it's not supposed to be here. You're here to learn. Because as impressive as the ice caravans are, the real wonder, the part that still makes engineers scratch their heads and historians argue in conference halls, is how this building actually works. The secret isn't just in the snow, it's in the science. 400 BCE edition. You walk along the inner slope of the dome, tracing your hand across the Saruj walls. The shape of the yakhchal is no accident. The conical design isn't just pretty, it reduces airflow, minimises sun exposure, and pushes hot air upward while cool air sinks into the pit. A sort of passive refrigeration system, centuries ahead of its time. And then there's the material. Saruj isn't just a fun word to say, it's a waterproof miracle. The combination of lime and ash creates a kind of ancient cement, while the goat hair helps bind it all together. And yes, someone once decided egg whites would make it stronger. Why? Historians still argue whether it was a scientific discovery or just a case of an overly ambitious breakfast gone wrong. You stand near the centre now, looking up toward the oculus, an opening at the top that draws warm air out, like the nose of a sleeping beast exhaling. It's a thermal vent, a light source, and, if you're honest, kind of a mood feature all in one. And here's where it gets clever. Evaporative cooling. The Persians knew that when water evaporates, it takes heat with it. Around the yakhchal, shallow canals, called kanats, bring cold water underground, slowly moving through shaded channels. Sometimes they even deliberately let a small amount of water pool and evaporate at night, cooling the air that drifts into the dome. You crouch beside one of these channels now, watching as the water trickles in silence. The breeze from the nearby Badgir or Windcatcher Tower nudges the cooler air downward. It's like nature is being gently manipulated, coaxed into helping rather than forced. Of course, it's not foolproof. A sudden heat wave can shorten the snow's lifespan. A crack in the Saruj can let in warm air and spell disaster. One unlucky goat falling through the top vent, yes, that actually happened once, can ruin a week's worth of storage and morale. But on most days, the yakhchal holds firm. It does what it was built to do, in defiance of everything your modern instincts say about insulation and climate control. A visiting scribe from Babylon once wrote that Persians had trapped winter in a jar of earth. He wasn't far off. You think about the simplicity of it. No moving parts, no machinery, no refrigerant coils. Just earth, air, water, and knowledge. You might even call it elegant, the same way a spider web is elegant. Fragile but exact. Made to solve a very old problem in a very patient way. You lean back against the curved wall and exhale. It feels almost smug in here, like the yakhchal knows it's clever and is too dignified to gloat. Above you, light filter through the dome's narrow top, and the hush is deep and complete. No clanging pots, no shouting vendors, just the steady, sleepy drip of melting snow. Outside, it's blistering again. You know that. You'll feel it the second you step back through the doorway. But inside the air is cool, the snow is sleeping, and for just a little while longer, you've made summer forget itself. Dawn breaks like a cracked egg over the desert, yolk gold and sizzling hot before your second blink. Already, the yakhchal hums with silence, a lump of serene defiance on the edge of a waking city. But now comes the next marvel, how to move snow across the city without turning it into glorified drinking water. Enter the ice caravans, Persia's unlikely logistics masters. Camels, donkeys, and disgruntled humans line up with calculated precision. These aren't just beasts of burden, they're mobile coolers, outfitted with layers of insulating fabric and woven baskets padded with straw. It's like ancient DoorDash, but your cargo is colder and grumpier. You stand near a group of handlers wrapping chunks of ice with obsessive care. The process is almost ritualistic. First, they line clay pots or baskets with hay, then tuck in the snow like it's royalty. More straw, a linen cover, then another wrap, sometimes even padded with sheepskin if it's a long haul. These bundles look more like baby goats than blocks of ice. Today, you're riding along. Your assignment: accompany a mid-sized shipment to one of the aristocratic estates on the city's north side. Try not to let it melt, your superior says, with the tone of someone who's had this go wrong before. No pressure. The city streets are already heating up. Market vendors shout about dates and onions. A man carrying a tray of hot flatbread gives you a pitying look. You nudge your camel forward, gripping the reins with slightly more confidence than you feel. And then it begins. A slow, deliberate journey across baked earth, ducking under archways, hugging the shadows where they exist. You're part of a parade of condensation and grit. People gawk as you pass. Ice caravans are still novel here. Children point. One woman throws a cloth over her water jar, pretending it's chilled too. A fruit vendor raises an eyebrow and mutters, all this for a cold fig. But you start to appreciate the choreography. These deliveries aren't random. They follow shaded routes, pause under canopies, and even have designated cooling stations. Courtyards with fountains or cellars where ice can rest mid-journey. You stop in one such place. The shade is deep, the air thick with jasmine and goat. A boy fans your snow basket gently with a palm frond. You don't even ask if he's being paid. Some things are better left unknown. Of course, even ancient Persia had its version of bureaucracy. Each shipment requires a wax-stamped tablet indicating who ordered it, how much was sent, and where it's headed. You're handed one such record, a clay rectangle with soft cuneiform still drying. It's addressed to House of Lord Azamidoct, 3 bundles ice, 1 for sherbet, 2 for cellar. You tuck it carefully into your sash. Losing it would be unfortunate. And then there's the matter of theft. Believe it or not, stolen ice was a real issue. Some low-ranking couriers skimmed from deliveries, reselling small chunks to thirsty locals. One legend tells of a man who stored stolen snow under his floorboards, only to wake up to a collapsed home and a suspicious puddle. Historians still debate the accuracy, but it makes for a satisfying cautionary tale. Finally, you arrive. The estate gates open. Servants rush to meet you with copper bowls and anxious hands. The snow is unpacked with more care than most babies receive, and within minutes a sweating noble reclines in the shade, sipping a rose-scented drink topped with a sliver of icy luxury. You, on the other hand, are dismissed with a curt nod and a half-empty water skin. Fame, glory, not today, but as you walk away, you feel a strange satisfaction. The snow made it. The yakhchal worked. The desert, if only for a few moments, has been defeated. And back at the ice dome, another shipment is already being packed. The snow has arrived, but you're not out of the heat yet, literally or metaphorically. You've got bundles of half-melted snow, smelling faintly of straw and camel sweat, and now the real challenge begins, keeping it from turning into a very expensive puddle. You head toward the outskirts of the city, where construction is underway on a strange and ambitious structure. Workers swarm like ants, stacking sun-dried bricks with practiced speed. They're building something that looks oddly out of place in this dusty land. A dome without decoration, squat and pale, part of it dug below ground. No one calls it a refrigerator, of course. That word won't exist for another 2 millennia. But that's exactly what it is. This is the yakhchal, literally ice pit. And it's where your hard-won snow is supposed to live out the summer months in frosty silence. You squint at it from a distance and try to wrap your head around the design. It looks like something a sleepy child might sculpt out of clay, thick-walled, sloping up to a rounded peak like a turtle halfway underground. The base is a pit dug deep into the earth. The walls, almost a metre thick in some places, made of saruj, a brilliant Persian mixture of sand, clay, egg whites, goat hair, and lime. It sounds like a failed omelette recipe, but the result is shockingly effective. The walls are water resistant, heat resistant, and durable enough to shrug off the worst that desert weather can throw at them. You step inside. The temperature drops immediately. It's not freezing, not yet, but it's several degrees cooler than outside. The thick insulation and semi-subterranean design work together like a silent conspiracy against the sun. It feels like stepping into the earth's own cool breath. A foreman waves you over and shows you how the snow will be stored, packed tightly at the bottom, pressed flat to reduce air pockets, covered again with straw, then another layer of snow, then more straw. A layered snow lasagna, delicious only to engineers. You ask him how long the ice will last. He shrugs. Sometimes until late autumn. Depends on the dome. Depends on the sun. Not exactly the assurance you were hoping for, but then again, this is experimental architecture, no blueprints, just intuition, clay, and a lot of sweat. There's a fringe theory, still whispered by some, that earlier forms of the yakhchal existed even before the Achaemenids, that humble villagers dug pits to preserve winter snow centuries before emperors made it fashionable. Historians still argue whether these grassroots coolers directly influenced the grander domes we see now, or if they were simply parallel ideas evolving in isolation. Either way, the logic is the same. Dig deep, insulate well, and trust the desert to underestimate you. You help lower a few blocks of snow into the pit. They glisten faintly in the low light, wrapped like treasures. It's a solemn moment, oddly enough. After all the trouble, the snow is now out of your hands. Literally. It belongs to the yakhchal. As evening falls, you climb the narrow exterior steps and reach the dome's upper rim. From here, the city looks softened, like it's melting under the bronze sunset. You see rooftops, gardens, the silhouettes of wind catchers, and somewhere beyond them all, the king's court. He's probably sipping warm wine right now and waiting for you to bring him something better. A worker beside you sighs and wipes his brow. "It's funny," he says. "All this effort, and tomorrow it'll still be hot." You laugh, because he's right. Still, the yakhchal stands, a miracle of mud, geometry, and sheer stubbornness, and tomorrow it will begin its real job. Storing the impossible. Ice in Persia. Cold in July. A little defiance against the laws of nature. Not bad for a pile of dirt. You're back at the edge of the city again, feet dusty, lips cracked, and a little wiser now. But you're not going to the yakhchal today. You're heading toward the town square, where something different, but equally cold, is waiting, because it turns out that while nobles sip ice-draped sherbets under silk canopies, everyday Persians also have their own frozen pleasures. Welcome to the world of ancient Persian street snacks. You follow the sounds of gossip and clinking copper toward a shady alley lined with vendors. A boy is hawking crushed tamarind candies. Someone nearby is grinding dried mint into powder. And nestled between them all is a cart you might easily miss. Just a low wooden frame, a basin of cracked ice, and a bowl of something thick and amber-coloured. The vendor, a wiry man named Farrokh, gestures you closer. "You want the good kind?" he asks. You nod, of course. The good kind sounds necessary. He pulls back a linen cloth to reveal what looks like a slush of honey, lime juice, and, yes, snow. "Not from the yakhchal," he says proudly. "Mine's mountain chilled. This is faludi, or at least its ancestor. Long before refrigeration, Persians figured out how to blend vermicelli-like noodles made of starch with sugar syrup and rose water, then chill the mix over ice and serve it with a squeeze of citrus. It's cooling, fragrant, and just exotic enough to feel luxurious without requiring palace connections." Farrokh scoops some into a copper bowl and hands it to you with a grin. You take a bite. It's cold, tangy, a little chewy, and dangerously refreshing. You have to eat it fast, he warns, or it turns into soup. He gestures around at other carts. One sells a drink made from sour cherry syrup and snow. Another offers cold cucumber broth with yogurt and herbs. A precursor to today's dew, perhaps. There's even a sweet made by layering fruits with ice and ground pistachio. This, you realise, is Persian refrigeration in public form, the yakhchal's streetwise cousin. But there's a problem, or rather, a challenge. All this snow needs to be restocked daily, and not every vendor has connections to a nobleman's supply. Some families build their own mini ice pits in cellars, or buy leftover slush from temple deliveries. Others trade favours, ice for spices, or straw for snow transport. It's a whole microeconomy based on frost. Historians still argue whether these treats were widely accessible or mostly reserved for the urban middle class. The truth is probably muddled, like the faluda melting in your bowl. But, judging by the crowds gathered here, icy delights weren't just for the elite. They were cultural, comforting, celebratory, and tied to seasonal rituals. You watch a family buy 3 bowls and sit on a curb to eat them, giggling as the youngest tries to lick the syrup from his chin. Someone nearby fans their face with a palm leaf. A girl drops a coin and chases it through puddles of melted snow. There's no royalty here, just people trying to stay cool. Farrokh tells you about the time his cousin tried to fake mountain snow by freezing water in clay pots overnight. It almost worked, until a goat drank half of it. Goats, he says solemnly, do not care about dessert. By midday, the basin is nearly empty. The sun is relentless. The faluda is softer now, more slush than ice, but no one seems to mind. It's the moment of cool that matters, the illusion, the memory of a colder place. As you leave, Farrokh hands you a sliver of lemon peel. For your breath, he says. It keeps the heat away. You pop it in your mouth and walk on, a little stickier than before, but grateful. Ice, you're beginning to understand, isn't just for emperors or engineers. It belongs to the people too. And even in a land of fire-coloured hills and scorched stone roads, there's always room for a chilled moment of joy. As the sun sinks lower behind the rugged Zagros hills, the heat doesn't vanish, it simply changes shape. The breeze is slower now, thick with clay dust and jasmine smoke. You've spent days walking between the high-born domes and humble street stalls, watching ice defy the desert. But now, you're being summoned to the Scholars' Quarter, where a more curious group awaits. The thinkers, astronomers, architects, and record keepers. People who don't carry ice, they measure it. You find them in a shaded colonnade, gathered around a clay table littered with wax tablets, ink-stained papyrus, and something that looks suspiciously like a scale made from bird bones and string. A man with a pointed beard and absolutely no tolerance for humour waves you over. We're calculating the thermal retention curve of packed snow in desert wind tunnels, he says. You blink. That means, he adds with exaggerated patience, how long it takes for snow to melt when exposed to dry wind. Ah, that. This is where the real fun begins. Because while the builders and haulers are marvels in their own right, these people are trying to quantify coldness, to turn comfort into code, temperature into theory. The Persians didn't have thermometers, but they had keen eyes and clever tricks. They'd note how fast ink thickened on a scroll, or how long it took for water in an open bowl to evaporate. They'd measure the depth of nighttime frost with reeds, record air movement using smoke trails, and chart seasonal temperatures based on the blooming of certain herbs. You watch as one young scribe, no older than 15, uses a pendulum to track how many swings it takes before the sun melts a thread of snow draped over a bowl. He mutters to himself, 12 swings, same as last week, consistent. Nearby, an architect sketches a cross-section of a yakhchal on a clay tablet. He's trying to model airflow inside the dome using concentric curves and wind angle notes. He looks up at you and mutters, we need to build the next 1.5 cubits deeper. The frost line is rising. You ask what the frost line is? He sighs, where snow stops being snow. Of course, not all observations are purely scientific. Some veer into the speculative, even mystical. One record claims that on the solstice, ice stored with saffron lasts longer. Another suggests burying a sliver of turquoise beneath the dome floor ensures a milder melt. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were symbolic, experimental, or just attempts to keep apprentices entertained. You're handed a wax tablet filled with notes in Old Persian. It reads like a sleep-deprived scientist's diary. Snow from northeast mountain lasted 3 days longer than southeast. Wicker baskets better than linen wraps after 10 parasangs of travel. Bad Gear 3 is clogged again. Pigeons? You chuckle. The problems of the past don't feel so distant after all. One scholar, clearly the most eccentric of the bunch, tells you about his theory that the wind has moods, that certain breezes are better suited to ice storage than others. He's even named them. You politely avoid asking if they talk to him, but here's what really strikes you. Despite the limitations of their tools, these people aren't just recording what works. They're pushing boundaries, they're testing, arguing, refining. They're trying to understand not just how the yakhchal functions, but why. They want to replicate it elsewhere, deeper in the desert, closer to the sea, even in lands that don't yet have qanats. There are even discussions of exporting the design. Ambassadors from Egypt and India have asked for schematics. Copies of copies travel along the silk routes. Somewhere out there, someone might be building a dome like this for the first time. You sit on a low stool and drink a cup of warm, spiced milk, while the scholars talk into the evening. The air cools. The fireflies come out. One of them starts drafting a new model for a double-layered ice dome, one inside another, like a desert matryoshka. You don't understand all the math, but you understand the excitement. They're not just preserving snow anymore. They're preserving knowledge. The next day, you wake to the gentle sound of someone swatting flies with a sandal, a charming reminder that no matter how advanced the architecture gets, the desert still has a sense of humour. Today, your task takes you to the part of the palace most visitors never see. The royal cold room, where ice meets politics, luxury, and just a hint of passive-aggressive rivalry. You're there on errand, of course, but being there means seeing firsthand what all this effort is really for. You're led through Naruhoro Satsitamor Sasanturu, Idarals Quarkaits, lined with frescoes of mythical beasts and bored-looking kings. Eventually you arrive at a low-ceilinged room tucked beneath the eastern wing of the palace. It's dim, thick-walled, and mercifully cool. Inside, slaves and servants scurry about, carrying trays of cut fruit, chilled wine, and delicate pastries stuffed with honey and fig. But the centerpiece, literally, is a carved alabaster basin filled with shaved ice, dyed pink with pomegranate juice. You try not to stare or drool. A court steward glides past you, eyes half-lidded, clearly unimpressed with the miracle happening in front of him. The ice came late, he murmurs. Again, you try not to take it personally. Here, ice is more than a refreshment. It's a statement, a political prop, a way for rulers to display control over nature itself. If the king can drink cold wine in a desert, what else might he control? The steward gestures to an older man at the far end of the chamber, cloaked in green silk. That's Vizier Ardavan, he whispers. He once had a rival's ice redirected mid-delivery, just to ruin a party. You blink, a cold war indeed. As you step closer, you catch snippets of conversation among the nobility. Oh, the ice in Persepolis is so grainy this year. I heard the Babylonian couriers are adding salt now. Tacky. Do you think this was mountain snow, or that pond ice? Even here, you sense the undercurrent of one-upmanship. Whose palace has the clearest ice, the freshest sherbet? Whose yakhchal loses the least to melt? It's not just about comfort, it's about reputation. Then there's the presentation. Some dishes are served with tiny glass or crystal bowls buried in ice, while others float on rosewater slush in wide copper trays. The kitchen has clearly been instructed to show off. You suspect more time went into chilling these delicacies than cooking them. And of course, the king's sherbet arrives last, a towering creation of pomegranate and almond milk, gently resting on a bed of shaved ice, so finely packed it looks like silk. One servant fans him as he eats, another dabs his brow. You can't help but think of the snowbearers, trudging down the Zagros with frozen bundles under starlight. And now, here that effort is, melting softly into luxury. You whisper to the steward, "How long does it last?" He shrugs. An hour, maybe less. But the point is, it's here. Outside this cool sanctuary, it's nearly 40 degrees Celsius. People fan themselves with palm fronds. Dogs sleep in the shade of date carts. But here, inside the royal cold room, it's winter for a moment, a quiet rebellion against the season. One noble woman nearby taps her bowl with a finger. "It's melting too fast," she says. "Next time, tell them to use the ice from the North Dome." You wince. That's your dome. Eventually, you're dismissed with a curt wave and a lukewarm compliment. "Not bad for Shiraz ice," someone mutters as you retreat. But still, you smile. You've seen the top of the pyramid, all the snow gathering, the canal digging, the wind-catching towers. They all culminate in a single cold mouthful for someone in silk. Strange, isn't it? Historians still argue whether the cold room was truly necessary or just a fashionable vanity project. Some believe it helped store medicines or preserve perishable herbs. Others say it was all pomp. Either way, it was maintained, staffed, and guarded as seriously as the treasury. As you exit, a boy runs past carrying a new bundle of snow wrapped in muslin. You watch it disappear into the cool shadows and realise, in Persia, ice isn't just a material, it's a message. A quiet, glistening whisper that says, "We are in control," even if, sometimes, it melts faster than expected. By now, you've grown oddly attached to the yakhchal. You visit it daily like it's a favourite relative, a cool, quiet aunt who never asks too many questions. But tonight, you're here for something different. Tonight, you're going to witness the ice making itself. Yes, that's right. Not just storing snow, making ice in the desert. You sit beside an elderly worker named Atusa. She's stirring a clay bowl of something that looks suspiciously like water and muttering to herself. "You have to wait for the wind," she says, as if that clears anything up. Then she gestures you forward. Together, you walk out beyond the dome, toward a shallow basin lined with stone and surrounded by low mud brick walls. It looks a little like a ceremonial bath, until you realise it's meant to freeze water, not warm bodies. The technique is deceptively simple. Atusa fills the basin with water from the nearby Qanat just after sundown. The water is cold already, having travelled underground for hours, and once the sun dips and the air thins and chills, a miracle begins to form. The key is in the design. The basin is only a few inches deep, which exposes more surface area to the cold night air. It's placed in a low-walled enclosure that blocks out the wind, but traps a pocket of frigid microclimate, especially just before dawn. You kneel beside the basin, running your fingers through the water. It's already cooler than expected. "Don't breathe too hard," Atusa says, half joking. "You might warm it up." She's not wrong. The process is delicate. If the night's too warm or the air too dry, the water won't freeze. If the wind picks up too early, and it might carry away the cold air. It's a balancing act. One part science, one part wishful thinking. You ask how often it works. "Most nights," she says. "In winter, almost always. In spring, maybe one night in 4. In summer." She shrugs. You pray to Anahita and go to bed early. The next morning, just before the first light kisses the horizon, you return. A thin film of ice stretches across the basin. It shimmers like glass. You touch it. It cracks like sugar. Ice. Real, desert-born, sky-chilled ice. Workers carefully break the sheets and gather the fragile chunks. They're slid into clay pots and carried, one by one, to the yakhchal. It's a small haul, nowhere near what the mountain snow caravans brought, but it's precious, hard-earned, the kind of ice you admire before using. You learn this technique isn't just Persian. Versions of it pop up across Central Asia, even in parts of China and Afghanistan. But the Persians may have refined it best, working with their terrain, combining the freezing basins with qanats and yakhchals into a system so coherent, it makes you wonder if they had some kind of ancient spreadsheet. And yet, despite the cold calculations behind it, the whole affair feels romantic. The idea of drawing ice from starlight, of harnessing the breath of night to chill water. It makes your modern freezer feel terribly unpoetic. As the sun rises, melting the last stray corners of the basin ice, you sit with Atusa under a fig tree and share a laugh. She tells you about the time a batch of freezing water turned out to be mostly goat pee, some neighbour's pet, having wandered into the basin. The nobleman drank it anyway, she says with a wicked grin. Swore it was the cleanest ice he ever tasted. You nearly spit your water. Clean is a relative term. Apparently. Historians still debate just how much ice was made this way. Some think it was a symbolic effort more than a practical one. Others argue that in colder provinces or elevated cities, freezing pans like this were the main source of ice all winter long. The truth probably lies somewhere in between, like most things in history, but one thing's for sure, the Persians didn't sit around waiting for the mountains to do all the work. They studied the sky, shaped the land, and learned to steal a sliver of cold from the stars. Not bad for people in sandals. The sun set slowly behind the high Persian mountains, casting long shadows across the desert sands. You feel the weight of time settle softly around you, like a cool blanket over warm shoulders. But before you close your eyes and drift, there's one last chapter of this icy tale to explore. The people behind the yakhchal, the unsung heroes, the labourers, the artisans, and the dreamers. They weren't kings or scholars, but their hands shaped history just as surely. Think of the water carriers who made daily pilgrimages to refill the qanats feeding the yakhchals. Their feet knew every stone and crevice, their muscles memorised the weight of heavy vessels balanced on shoulders or strapped to donkeys. Without their steady rhythm, the ice would have turned to nothing but a fleeting chill. Then there were the stonemasons and mud plasterers, whose expertise held the domes together year after year. They mixed clay with secret additives, pigeon drop-ins, goat hair, crushed minerals, ingredients that sound strange but created walls as strong as stone and almost as smooth as glass. One mason confided that the best plaster smelled faintly of almonds and earth, a scent that promised coolness even before you touched the dome. You also meet the ice haulers, young men who, under moonlight, carved blocks from mountain snow, wrapped them tightly, and loaded them onto donkeys or sledges for the journey. Their paths could be perilous, sometimes threatened by sandstorms, sometimes by the dry heat that seemed to chase the ice like a relentless hunter. Many of these haulers sang to pass the time, their voices soft and steady, creating a kind of lullaby for the frozen treasure they guarded. Some songs are still sung today, relics of that ancient labour. Behind the scenes, women played vital roles too, especially in food preparation and medicine. They crafted recipes to use the ice. Cool drinks, chilling syrups, soothing compresses. Their knowledge was passed from mother to daughter, whispered over fires and between baskets of figs. In some villages, rituals marked the first delivery of ice each year. Simple ceremonies thanking the earth and the sky for the gift of cold. These ceremonies blended gratitude with practicality, reinforcing a bond between people and the environment. Historians still debate the extent to which these communities cooperated or competed for ice resources. Was it shared freely or guarded jealously? Records suggest both. In some places, ice was communal. In others, fiercely protected. You realise that the yakhchal was more than an invention. It was a social contract, a testament to collaboration and trust in a harsh world. And like all great human stories, it's full of contradictions. Of ice that melts, but memories that don't. Of labour hidden in shadow, but legacy shining bright. You sit back, listening to the evening breeze ruffle palm fronds. The cold you followed has warmth beneath it, a warmth of shared effort and quiet endurance. This, you think, is the real magic behind the frozen domes. You've experienced the thrill of invention, the quiet lives warmed by stolen ice, and the slow, inevitable failures of these ancient freezers. But the story doesn't end here, or even in Persia. In fact, the yakhchal's icy influence drifted far beyond its desert birthplace, carried by merchants, travellers, and the steady march of human curiosity. Today, you trace the ice legacy across continents, imagining how knowledge travelled along dusty roads and rolling seas. The Silk Road, that ancient highway of silk, spices and stories, was more than just a trade route. It was a conveyor belt for ideas, including refrigeration techniques, caravans laden with precious stones, fragrant herbs, and yes, sometimes ice itself brought whispers of Persian domes to far-off lands. In China, for instance, you find records of elaborate ice pits called bingfang, used to store frozen water and cool food. While these predate Persian influence in some forms, there's intriguing evidence of shared design elements, particularly the use of underground chambers and wind catchers to direct airflow. Some scholars propose that Persian ideas inspired refinements in Chinese ice storage during the Han dynasty. Others argue these methods evolved independently. Historians still debate the direction of influence, but the parallels are striking. Further west, you envision the Hellenistic world, where Greek scholars and architects encountered Persian innovations following Alexander the Great's conquests. Vitruvius, the Roman architect, described methods of storing snow in deep pits lined with insulating materials. While Vitruvius never mentions the Persian yakhchal by name, some experts believe he adapted their designs into Mediterranean contexts. And then there's India, where texts mention shita gruhas, or cold houses, used to preserve perishables in the blazing heat. These, too, may owe some debt to Persian ice storage, especially in the northwestern regions near the Silk Road's terminus. In the Arabian Peninsula, similar domed structures called boringhistory or badgirs were built, capturing the desert breeze to cool water reservoirs. These weren't exactly yakhchals, but carried the same principle of architectural cooling, proof of an idea travelling and morphing like a whispered secret. You stand on a map, tracing the routes, silk threads of cold knowledge weaving through empires and deserts, crossing mountains and seas. But it's not just architecture, it's a mindset, the understanding that nature's cold could be captured, held, and shared. A breakthrough that transcended borders and centuries. As you ponder this, you sip a drink chilled with crushed ice, now something ordinary in your world, but once a luxury touched by the hands of Persian engineers and farmers. The yakhchal is not just a relic of Persia, it's a heritage of coolness that inspired innovations worldwide, laying the groundwork for modern refrigeration. Historians still argue about the exact timeline and who influenced whom. But one thing's clear, the desire to tame heat is universal. And thanks to those ancient desert builders, that desire turned into something tangible. A dome of frozen dreams beneath the relentless sun. You've seen the ice packed, shaved, carted, sipped, argued over, and carefully stored beneath fig trees. You've eaten Fallujah in the street and watched it melt in real time. But there's one question still lingering in your mind, one that people rarely ask out loud. What happens when things go wrong? Today, you find out. Because as you approach the western edge of town, you hear the unmistakable sound of yelling. A kind of musical chaos that can only mean something important is leaking. And, indeed, it is. A yakhchal, one of the older domes near the outskirts, has developed a crack, small but enough. A silvery trickle of meltwater is oozing from the base, pooling in the dusty path like a snitch with a story to tell. You stand down beside the dam sea, over Sierra, a round man with a red face and a fan made of reeds. Went too warm last week, he mutters, and the night winds didn't come, no breeze, the gods were napping. This isn't just a drip, it's a disaster in the slowest, wettest sense. A group of men and boys rush past you with baskets of straw, clay, and thick black pitch. It's time for an emergency repair, part patchwork, part prayer, and all sweaty effort. They empty the dome first, carrying bundles of now damp snow out like laundry on fire. It's not melted entirely, but it's close. The ice looks sullen, like it knows it's failed. Inside, the air is too warm, the walls are slick with condensation, and small drops fall from the dome's inner curve. The insulation has been compromised, something shifted. Maybe the angle of the sun, maybe a flaw in the adobe mix, maybe pigeons. Honestly, it's often pigeons. You watch as a young mason, named Baruz, climbs a wooden ladder and begins smearing clay over the crack. We'll thicken the base, he calls down, and maybe reinforce with palm rope. Not ideal, but it'll hold. For now. Everyone here knows the yakhchal is resilient, but not invincible, and maintaining it is an art form in itself. Every year, after the cold season ends, crews inspect each dome, checking for weak spots, patching erosion, reapplying lime plaster, and, if needed, recarving the steps that lead down into the pit. The trick is to never let it heat up too far, because once warm air seeps into the base, the whole structure becomes a glorified sauna, not what you want in a freezer. You follow the overseer to his ledger. We track every incident, he says. Every crack, every failed wind, every missed snow caravan. He shows you entries like Ice Dome 4 lost 8 baskets after a sandstorm. Canat flow slowed. Suspected blockage. 2 boys used dome as wrestling ring. Ground softened. Ice shift. You raise an eyebrow at that last one. We find their parents, he says flatly. These incidents are more common than most would think. Not every yakhchal lives forever. Some collapse in floods. Others are abandoned when qanats dry up or cities shift. One legend tells of a yakhchal so poorly placed, its contents melted every spring and turned the nearby grain market into a mosquito swamp. But not all failures are disasters. Sometimes meltwater is redirected, used to irrigate special medicinal plants or for washing ritual linens. Cold water has value too. It soothes feet. It cools tempers. It makes ordinary clay taste like something kinder. You walk back inside once repairs are underway. The new clay patch is already drying, baking in the heat like a scab over the old wound. It won't be perfect. This batch of snow is likely ruined. But the dome will hold. The memory of cold will remain. Historians still debate how often these failures occurred. Was this a rare hiccup? Or a seasonal struggle faced every year by every community? The records are incomplete, scattered like ice chips in sun. But based on the tone of this overseer, 1 part resignation, 2 parts dry sarcasm, you suspect breakdowns were a regular part of life. Even perfection sweats. Before you leave, a boy hands you a damp rag that had been used to mop up the meltwater. You press it to your forehead. It's not exactly refreshing, but it's honest. A reminder that even the most ingenious inventions have limits. The desert is patient after all. It waits. It watches. And eventually, it always warms what was once cold. But not today. Not if Beruz and his patchwork clay can help it. The next morning, you rise early before the streets heat to their usual sizzle and follow the scent of damp earth and burning straw to a quiet village just outside the city walls. Here, the buildings are smaller, the walls patched with straw and mud, and the breeze carries fewer perfumes and more honest dust. But what draws you today isn't royalty, science, or architecture. It's something simpler. You're here to learn how ordinary people, farmers, potters, shepherds, used ice in their everyday lives. Because while ice was prestige in the palace and theory in the scholars' halls, out here it was something else entirely. A practical miracle, rare and precious, but woven into routines where it mattered most. You meet Shireen, a woman in her 60s who spends her mornings making yogurt in clay jars. She waves you into the courtyard and sets a bowl of thick, chilled mast in front of you. It's better cold, she says. It doesn't turn sour so quickly, and the children eat more of it. She doesn't have her own yakhchal, of course, but once a week her cousin in the city sends a cloth-wrapped bundle of slush tightly packed in goat wool, which she stores in a tiny underground pit behind her oven. It's barely a metre deep, shaded by a fig tree, but it holds coolness just long enough to make life gentler. We use it for yogurt, sometimes to firm butter, she says, and once a year, for weddings, we make something called sharbat. Her eyes twinkle. It's lemon, mint, sugar, snow, and luck. Down the road, you find a group of boys splashing in a qanat-fed irrigation ditch. One of them proudly shows off a stone pot kept submerged in the cold water. It's filled with fresh milk, kept chilled to delay curdling. Another boy adds, with the certainty of youth, "My grandfather used to cool his sandals in here before market day." Useful information. Inside a small workshop, a potter named Dariush is glazing cups with a mixture of clay and salt. Cold water helps the slip settle better, he says, pointing to a jug half buried in shaded sand. It's not yakhchal cold, but it's cool enough, if you know where to dig, He tells you how, during festivals, or when someone was ill, a family might pool money to buy ice from the city. The ice seller would arrive on donkey cart, ringing a copper bell, selling chip blocks wrapped in straw. It melts fast, Dariush warns, so you'd better have a plan. In the back of his shop, he's experimenting with a clay pot design inspired by the yakhchal itself, a double-walled jar meant to keep wine or syrup cooler for longer. Maybe it works, he says. Maybe not. But the shape feels right, doesn't it? You nod. It does. In another home, you meet an elderly midwife who speaks of ice compresses used to soothe fever or swelling. We wrap it in cloth, she explains, never direct on the skin. Too much cold is dangerous. But a little saves lives. This isn't about indulgence or display. Out here, ice is rationed, guarded, cherished. It's a helper, not a trophy. Historians still debate how widespread ice use really was among the working class. Some argue it was rare and symbolic. Others insist that even in small doses, it played a vital role in medicine, food storage, and ritual. Based on what you're seeing, the answer might be somewhere in between. Not common, but intentional. Back in the village square, you spot a hand-carved wooden board, etched with names and numbers. It's a snow ledger. Families take turns buying into snow deliveries from the city. It's not unlike a modern co-op, but instead of vegetables, they're investing in coldness. Your name could go on there too, if you lived here. If you had a use for 3 handfuls of frost in the week ahead. As the sun climbs higher, you find yourself craving shade and gratitude. These people don't have silk cushions or marble basins, but they found a way to make cold comfort part of their lives. And somehow, that makes the yakhchal feel even more impressive. Not just because it stores ice, but because it shares it. Before you leave, Shirin hands you a sealed jar wrapped in damp cloth. Sharbat for the road, she says. Don't let it melt. You smile, sip, and walk slowly, savouring the miracle on your tongue.